Welcome back to Razmafzar TV. Hi, Bede. We have Bede. We are having Bede from Australia. Hi, Bede. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Bede, today we are going to talk about, let me just say it the way we say it in Persian, Katar or Katar, the way you want to call it, and which is translated into this deterministic way in English, push dagger, Indian push dagger, which is, of course, it was also used to cut. We're going to talk about Katar. And okay, so Bede, I just, what is Katar and where was it used? Before I just leave the floor to Bede to explain, I was just talking to Bede that 22 museums in Iran I analyzed, and many of them are documented because they have papers when they were given to museum, mostly come from royal collection. I have seen 3 Katars in Iranian museum collections. All of them have provenance, and all of them have paper. It was given to this Shah from Indians. They don't say Mughals, they say Indians. So they were both, all of them, all 3 presents. And then on top of that, something else which comes, I was talking about Ayin Qalandari, Safavid period manual. It's not the only one, where the Safavids say they don't understand why the Mughal Indians were using such a dagger. They certainly learned it from there, but it doesn't make sense because you can use for fighting, Safavids say, pishkhabs, khanjar, or kart. Because, Safavid texts always say they couldn't carry shamshir for civilian purposes. Every Safavid man at least leaves house with 2 carts, 1 cart, 1 khanjar, 2 khanjar, or a combination of pishkhabs. You need 2 in case a fight breaks out.
In which case, I think.
Yes.
But yeah.
So these were not used in Safavid period Iran or earlier. These were certainly given to a lesser extent as presents. So these were typically Indian weapons. Okay, Bede, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point to make. In Iran, they would have referred to India as Hindustan, which would cover both Pakistan, modern India, and Bangladesh. And what they saw was the katar was the typical weapon of Hindustan. So this was the place where it was used. It was hardly known outside. It was ubiquitous. Virtually every grown man that was wealthy enough to own one and was in the military class would have one. They were considered a very useful fighting weapon. But, of course, from outsiders' point of view, if you weren't trained how to use them, they were a little bit difficult to work out. Yeah. Hence the punch dagger, push dagger kind of nomenclature. That's not to say you couldn't strike with them, though, to be honest, I think a lot of Westerners have a somewhat limited view of how they were held. They think of them, straight out from a fist like this. Whereas what evidence I've seen is that they were held slightly obliquely, and which gave you much more movement in the wrist. And because they protected up the wrist, or sometimes out that way, they were actually a much more useful fighting knife than people who hadn't seen them used would think. I mean, I've seen some kind of scripted katar bouts from southern India, and I mean, you definitely wouldn't want to get in a fight with one of these guys, or women for that matter, because it's a really deadly weapon in the hands of somebody who's been trained how to use
So
it.
let us
But
go to the etymology beat. Oh, where was that? Hold on, please. My text. Where did I put this one? I just lost the slides for this talk today. Oh yeah, now I found it. Very good. Okay. Okay, let us just move. If we come and take a look at that, there are some regarding the origin of it, right? Some researchers say that it could be Dravidian Tamil origin. So the term, they say, derived from the Tamil word kattari. So according to Burrow and colleagues and Rajan, this is a dagger or short stabbing weapon. So katari itself may come from katu, to bind fixed, or ari, blade, so fixed blade, or katai, wood, compact, vetri, sharpness, compact, sharp weapon, as the colleagues say. This is this Tamil origin, one of the suggestions. Again, in research, people always argue, and it's good that they argue because different ideas can come.
and it's important to
Yeah.
Stress the importance of southern India and the various language groups there
Yes.
in the development of katars, because even a lot of the earlier katars, or the earlier highly developed, elaborate katars, come from southern India.
Yes.
I mean, 17th, 18th century.
Absolutely.
I mean, we've got lots of paintings of ones from the Mughal period. But there are quite a lot of surviving high grade, really technically well developed ones from South India, Tanjore and places like that.
Yes.
It's good to kind of recognize that
Yes.
they could have had
Yes.
maybe a very early input into them. It's hard to say.
Yes. Then we have also Sanskrit influence. Some scholars suggest, like Monier Williams and so, a link to the Sanskrit kartari, meaning scissors or cutting instrument. So possibly, it's not my statement, I'm just quoting. This reflects the scissor-like action of some folding or multi-bladed katar.
Yeah, well, that's a bit more of a stretch. In the cutting instrument part, I completely agree, because I think they were used a lot for cutting.
Yes.
But the folding blades are almost all 19th century.
Yes.
It's not an old process. Multi-blades, they're definitely early ones.
Like we had in Aina Akbari, as we will talk about it, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
So, but yeah, I find the scissors metaphor is probably a little bit stretching it.
Yes. Yes.
And also that word has a endosyllable R before the T,
Yes.
which you wouldn't think would drop out. I mean, in English, we don't pronounce, in English in Australia and the UK, we don't pronounce the R at the end of a syllable.
Yes.
Whereas in America, they do.
Yes.
But it would be obscure to think that this word would drop the R from spelling in the various languages.
Yes.
And retain it in, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Then the next one, which come closer to Mughal era, the term Katar was adopted into Persian-influenced Hindustani, losing its Dravidian inflection. So then Mughal texts refer to it as katara or katar, reinforcing its status as a royal weapon. So we will go back to this. These are some colleagues, some other sources said. Now we come to my own research. In Persian text, which is also based on Dekhoda, also mentions them, but Dekhoda is based on historical texts. In Persian, you can call it Katar is clear as one, but I'll come back to it. One of them is jamdar. In Persian, we say, I pronounce it again. In Persian, jamdar or jamdhar. Jamdar, you can take a look at this, jamdar or jamdhar, a type of Indian push dagger. The lexicon of Anandaraj by Muhammad Padishah explains. This is a Persian lexicon, also on Persian used in Hindustan. explained that jamdhar is an Indian term originally and describes a type of dagger. And according to Borhan, another lexicon, Persian lexicon, period lexicon, it is a weapon that is called katar. You see here katar for the first time, right? In
Yeah.
India. And its original form is jamdar. Now that gets very interesting for Persian speakers. Jamdar, not jamdar,
Yeah.
jamdar. That means side of the body cutter. That's interesting. Cutter beat, cutter. Side
Yeah.
of the body cutter, not
Yes.
stabber. And in Indian, it
Yes.
means, now this is interesting, the tooth of the death of angel.
And
I didn't
definitely.
even know the death of angel has teeth, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
However, the annotator of the lexicon of Borhan, they're all period lexicons from that time, does not accept this translation and points out that jamdhar is the abbreviation of jamdhar. So jam means angel of death, and dahar means the edge of a sword. Interesting, huh? So the weapon jamdhar,
Rather than the two.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the weapon jamdhar is double-edged. You see that? I think, Pete, these are from period Persian texts. Aren't they
Yeah.
fascinating? They are.
It's very, because I mean there's a whole kind of technical jargon here that I mean ordinary lexicographers writing dictionaries have problems unless they've got someone to explain the jargon to them.
Yeah.
Because a word may have an obvious meaning in the language, but it may have a different meaning when it's used about a specific item.
So, guys, this
I
is in
think
my lexicon. One of the entries of 5,000 entries on weapons. This jamdar or jamdhar is one of the entries. Excuse me, Bede, I interrupted you. Go ahead, please.
no, that's okay. I think that when I look at it, the fact the kind of complexity of that following the D, sometimes it's aspirated, sometimes it's got an H after it, and this and the fact that you can have JANB, it's quite common in a lot of languages for Jan followed by a plosive for the N to change to an M. So this is all kind of logical in its kind of linguistic way. There's a lot of times well, I can think of one off the top of my head which is really unrelated, which is the wrapping that the Turks put on the handle of their bows is called mushamma, but it's also written down as mushanba, where one of the M's are changed to N's and one of the N's becomes a B. So we've got this kind of changing of letters within words is not an unusual thing.
Yes.
I think the angel of death one's a bit scary, but
so next time you hold one, remember that, please.
I'll be very reverent. I think I'll be very careful.
So, guys, again, 4 variation. Jamdar, look at this. Jamdar, jamdhar, right? Jamdar, jamdhar. Jambdar, 3. Jamdhar, 4. If you want to add katar to it, 5. Right?
Yeah.
5 variations. I remember, I don't know who it was. I don't know. Some years ago, a collector or a dealer, I don't remember. My memory fails. He told me he was using the term jamdhar katari. Well, I mean, there is no need to say jamdhar katari because they are, they're like you say the same word in 2 different variations,
Yeah.
right? Anyhow,
Yeah.
at least not in Persian. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. But I can.
You say the same thing in 2 different words, right? So then we have
Yeah.
again, another type of Indian push dagger. Okay, you see that we talked about it. But what gets interesting, Beat, another entry, is qadar. Qadar is another type to refer to katar. Look at this in Persian. Gadarak, gadarak, or gadarak. Okay, look, excuse me. Qadar, even gadr, gadarak,
Mhm.
or qadarak, another variations of referring to Katar in Persian texts.
Now,
Now,
the ak at the end, does that mean little?
yes, it does.
Lost. Yeah. So
Yes, it does.
diminutive. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have here qadarak. Okay, in Adab al-Harb al-Shujaya, a type of piercing weapon. Again, push dagger katar. Okay, we talked about it, Katar. So I just want,
Yeah.
okay, one thing, warning.
So that's
The
going back to the 12th century, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. We will come back to it. The Huda states that
Mm.
Gadarak is also a type of male armor. You need to be careful. Is a short, male armor which only covered short sleeve your body. Is also called Gadarak in Persian. So it's not
Oh.
only referring to Katar, right? You
Mhm.
know, there be one thing I just want to tell people because you and I, we worked on different period texts, right? Guys, be careful with terminology. It's not as easy as you think it is, right? It's like a linguistic work. It's not just that you just go and, okay, this was used like this. This is like a science of lexicography. The science of linguistics is not that easy as people think it is, right? Okay, go
Yeah.
on, Pete.
Yeah. Well, I'll expand on that a little bit because the thing is that because something is named something, it doesn't mean it is the same as something else named that 200 years later. Because
Exactly.
names sometimes last longer than the objects they name. And we use the word sword in English, and it means 100 different things.
Yes.
Because when it was first used, maybe there was only those Anglo-Saxon type swords, and that was the only sword that they meant. By the Middle Ages, there were maybe 10 types of sword in common use. And then you get things like messes in German, which really means a knife, but some of them were swords, but they
Yes.
didn't call them swords. So it's really, you've got to be really careful with nomenclature because something might be called a katar, but it might just mean dagger and not specifically a dagger with a cross grip. And
You
I
know,
think
like
that's
these
really something.
like these Persian inscriptions, like these Persian inscriptions, you see Persian poem, sorry, Persian poem, and written as inscription inscribing خنجر on the handle, sometimes on the blade. دسته خنجرت جهانگیر باشد گرچه یک مشت استخوان باشد. The handle of your dagger is going to conquer the world, although it's only made of bone. But bone could also be referring to the walrus teeth or to anyone, right?
Oh,
Or
yeah, yeah,
also
yeah.
to elephant ivory. Now, look, this is put mostly on khanja, but as I've seen in my recent books, it is also put on peshqabs or also on card. So you see, they don't use khanjar only for this double edge. So they just this is beautiful. So okay, khanjar is a short fighting weapon. We put it also on card and on pishkas because his poem is very beautiful in Persian. And then okay, why is it
Yeah,
in khanjar, right? So it's important to know these things. Excuse me, go ahead, please.
yeah. That there are terms cross over all the time.
Yes.
And we, as modern people, are trying to categorize things so that we don't get things mixed up when we're talking about them. But 300 years ago, somebody would, in a particular city, would call something a hanjar, and they would know exactly what they meant because it was the hanjar that was used in their city.
Beat,
But to somebody in another city or another country, it's a different weapon.
do you remember? I think we talked about it on. We are going to make a different episode on that later on Persian period firearms. It's also very interesting. And I remember Congreve rockets. Remember in Mysore, India, when they were
Yeah,
fighting. And then I went to Iranian museums. They are very helpful. You know that they have always been helping us with manuscripts and so. So I asked them, "Do you have
they're
anything?"
great.
You know, they're really great people. So, do you guys have anything on Congreve rockets Persian version? They said, no, rockets, we don't have period rockets. Are you sure? No. So I was going through this, and then they talked about fishang. And fishang in modern Persian, today's Persian, means bullet. Then I just asked them, why are there so many manuals on, because, on the list, on bullets?
Yeah.
And then they said, yeah, because they classified bullets. And I said, I know firearms, but okay, bullets, fine. But back then, bullets were not like bullets of today. You are not going to write so many manuscripts only on bullets. Do you understand? Why? They say, yeah, they wrote about bullets. Let me see. Yeah, but they're only bullets. What do you want to do with them? Start with other ones. So let me see. And I looked. They were all about rockets. So back then, feshang was used to refer to rocket, not like today. And that's
Yeah.
why I
Well,
found Mohandes Tabrizi, engineer Tabrizi, who wrote about Congreve rockets in Persian and wrote to the Qajar king, we need to introduce them. He developed a better one and he called those rockets feshang, of course. Back then they called it feshang. And none of Iranians speaking today would have even guessed that feshang back then was used to refer to, not a long time ago, beat Qajar period. Qajar
yeah.
period.
It's like technically in English you can refer to an arrow as a missile.
Ah.
But most people, when you say missile, think of a rocket.
A rocket, yeah, you're right. A rocket,
So I think
yeah.
it's exactly parallel in different cultures.
Yes.
That we can, and it's important for us to keep that in mind when you're reading something, because I remember well when we were doing some of the archery manuscripts, there were descriptions of bow lengths which couldn't possibly be real, and they had to be a description of the string length, how long the bow was when it was strung, because it would be literally too small. And but if you just read that verbatim and just said, oh, well, if they say it's so many fists long, that's how long the bow was. A bow shaped like that, so many fists long, would have been, like this big. I mean, it's Scythian bows. Some Scythian bows were that small, but we've got a lot of surviving Persian bows and a lot of illustrations of Persian bows, and none of them were that short. Maybe children's bows, but so you've got to be really careful. Something may explicitly, if you translate it word for word, mean one thing, but idiomatically might mean something entirely different. And I think it's really important to
Yes.
keep that in mind.
Okay, let's then move on, please. So we go then Gadarak, which is said in Adab al-Harb al-Shujai. You can see in aid to sight, translation of the sword classification on it. Well, here in aid to sight, because aid to sight, which is the main one, by on Persian manuscript written in India, right, by an Iranian who moved from Safavid era to help the Mughals as a military advisor. He wrote also Mirza Lutfullah, this book. But this book is not only the translation and interpretation of aid to sight, also the sword classification, only sword of Adab al-Harb al-Shujai is there. But then here, very short, refers to other weapons. One of them is qadarak. So as Bede already mentioned it, this is exactly written in Lahore in 1229, if you want to go to the Common Era, to 2030. So it was written there by Mubarak Shah Fakhr Mudabbar. Adab al-Harb al-Shujai, customs of war and bravery. I'll just give the floor to you. Let me just put some information from the background of this book here. Go ahead, please.
Well, this book is, I mean, I was first exposed to it because a friend of mine translated the archery section, which was immensely interesting. Because here we have a Persian writer who is both familiar with Persian and Central Asian weapons and has moved to India and is now familiar with Indian weapons as well. So he had a much broader view as a writer of the ways weapons could be constructed and what was done. And he had look, I'm only going from the archery section, which I read in detail. He had an anthropological interest in things. He details poison arrows made by tribesmen in the hills in various places, and the medical ideas they had for curing them if you got shot by a poison arrow. And so it wasn't like if you lived there your whole life, a lot of these things would be just part of everyday life and you wouldn't think about writing them down. But because he came from outside, he noticed a lot of things that everybody around him took for granted.
Yes.
Because he was a foreigner, technically. And so I found certainly the section on archery. I've seen a few other small sections. I haven't read your book yet, which I've got to get. That his broader perspective on things meant that when he described things, it it was clearer than, as we were talking about before, in those things where we say sword. Well, somebody might say, oh, he carried a such and such sword.
Mhm.
Now, half of the words we use for sword in English now, broadsword and bastard sword and things like that, were unknown in the period these things were being used
Yes.
because they're modern collectors' terms for things. Whereas here we've got 13th century, somebody is there who's sensitive to the fact that not all terms are the same, is writing them down. And I think that there's a real value in the, first of all, his perspective, his thoroughness when he has the opportunity, and he's a good man with a story. He can tell a good anecdote to illustrate something. Like his stories about archery are brilliant. Now these are not original. It's just that he's repurposed them to put into his book. But that's the thing. You read it, you get the idea. Then he tells a story about it, and you kind of get a more three-dimensional view of what's going on. So I think he was a good writer. He had an interesting perspective, and unlike a lot of people sitting in the middle of their own culture, he didn't take everything for granted. That was just everyday stuff. I mean, we have the same problem.
Yes. Then another one is Nujumul Ulum, Stars of Sciences, written in Bijapur, apparently by Sultan Ali Adil Shah himself, 1557 to 1579. And in Nujumul Ulum, I would like to thank to my colleagues, to our colleagues in Chester Library, who gave me the permission to publish those drawings of weapons from here. And this is written in Persian, right? Because the text includes many diverse cosmological accounts of the heavens and the earth containing Islamic and Hindu traditions. But, it's written in Persian. One part is about swords. One part of it is about archery. And I promise to you, Beat, you are going to have the translation on archery part soon. Remember, this is one of the to-do lists, right? But okay,
Yeah, yeah. One of the things we're going to do.
you remember we discussed that. We are going to do that.
Yes, I do.
Chester Library already gave me the permission, but they always ask me why haven't you finished it? I say, yeah, we are going to do it. But anyhow, that's something in future. I haven't forgotten that.
Yeah.
And so then they talk about weapons. Remember that, okay, we don't know if Adil Shah himself, one of those guys, who had all these Persian-speaking empires there next to Mughal India, he wrote, it's
Mm.
attributed to him. We don't know if he, Sultan Ali Adil Shah, wrote it, but whatever, it's written in Persian. It is the Persian text, as Chester Library says that, because I've seen some guys who translated it. They said this is it's a text which is written in Persian and Arabic and some Hindu terms. Well, this is a Persian text. If it has
Yeah,
the language is Persian, as Chester Library also says. So
yeah.
then they
People
said,
get confused
excuse me?
sometimes. People get confused sometimes because if you're not really fluent in a language, you can mistake the fact that languages have loan words from other
Yes,
languages. English has
absolutely.
tons of French, Latin, and Greek loan words
Absolutely.
used in technical senses.
Yeah.
And Farsi is the same. It's got a lot of loan words from Arabic.
Yes.
And if you were a Farsi speaker in India, then you would also have loan words from the various Indian languages
Yes.
for the specific things that do not exist in
Yes.
Farsi.
Absolutely.
It's not changing the language, it's just
Absolutely.
expanding the vocabulary.
Like, I mean, I have finished the translation of it on another Goharname, Book of Jewels, but this one is not like the one I published. Was by Ben Mansur, written in Iran itself. It was Persian, written in India, and
Mhm.
Beat gave me such headache because it talks about plants, but all plants based in India, Hindustan. So I had to do
Yeah,
lots of research, talk to colleagues from India about those plants. As you said, because what kind of plant is that? So
yeah,
exactly what you mentioned, right? Absolutely. So
exactly. Yeah,
so the book says you should also know that Hindus use some weapons that are well known to them, but some do not know their shape and structure, and even warriors do not know them well enough. Obviously, they were used to the eras of ancient infidel kings. The text continuously calls them infidels. He doesn't
Yeah.
call them Hindu rulers, right? I have to really mention that. I know it's not nice to talk about that, but rendering infidel kings as Hindu rulers is, well, what should I say? Salatin Qadim Kafare. Kafare means, or Kafre means infidel. Their
Yeah.
names as
Well,
follows. Look at this beat. Before
mhm.
the text shows swords which look like shamshir, swords which look like curved shamshir, or with a handle like killich, and so. And now they say these ancient infidel kings use weapons, and then they show the pictures. You can see the pictures in my book in A to Side because Chester Library allowed me to publish them. Tarvari, Tarvari, what does it sound? Tulvar, Talvar, right?
Yeah.
And then they
Yeah.
show a
Yeah.
Talvar. Tapash, Tapash is another word for pata. Then Dirkahak, Narsine, Kaitai, and Bank. Compared to a Nimche, Nimche means half sword, is Persian. By the way,
Yeah.
Nimche is Persian, half sword. Tarwari is shorter, it says, and has a high curve, according to them. But now look at this beat. Tapash, which is a pata, and they show a
Mm.
pata. I think I showed this picture. Guys, we cannot, for copyright reasons, show the picture drawings to you. You can consult my book, I Ate to Sign. Tapash has a handle and a cover that covers the handle. In the common language, they call it pata. That's what the book writes. This weapon is suitable for people who have an injured hand.
Yeah. Because it's a sleeve over your hand. It's going to protect your.
I love this one. Look at this. I read it again. I really love this one. This weapon is suitable for people who have an injured hand. Tapash looks like this. Then they show the drawing. Bank is a type of bana. Okay, it describes it. And it's a long sword that is used by two hands. This two-handed Indian sword, right? They show it, right? You know that, right? The other three
Yeah.
types which have been shown could not be identified. So then I couldn't identify these Hindu weapons. So the Rashi doesn't show them, right? The
Yeah.
qualities of zodiac disc and the principles are similar to the sword. We always talk about zodiac. And in my book also, zodiac signs, constellation of stars, are all translated that. I didn't leave them out. Guys, I have a really, I would like, because we talk about it. Do not leave out anything from text when you translate on weapons. Do not say they're superstitions. Do not say these are blah, blah, blah. We cannot transfer our ideas of today's world back then. I just would like Pete to add something to it, Pete. Go ahead, please, Pete.
Yeah. Well, this is you can narrow your view down to just the thing you're interested in translating and leave out the context. But if you leave out the context, it alters the meaning of the bit that you've translated. If you don't have context to how this form of words was fitted into the way that the author spoke, I can think of things where a particular word is used to refer to a particular thing, and if you just translate it without the context of the whole work, it seems really strange. I'm thinking that one of the kings of Portugal wrote a book on horsemanship, and throughout he uses the Portuguese word for beast to refer to horses, which doesn't sound very nice, quite insulting to the horse if the horse was reading the book. Very unlikely. But it clearly was a common part of speech to refer to horses as just beasts. But it's also clear from the text, if you read the text, that he was very aware of horses' personalities and differences and all this kind of stuff. So he didn't think of them as completely dumb beasts at all. But in the language of the time, that's how you refer to a horse. And you got on the animal. In his case, the word is translated as beast because it looks like beast in English. So he's using that terminology, but without the rest of the book to understand what he really thought about horses, then you would say, oh, well, they just treated horses like dumb animals and had no thought or care for them at all. But it's not true. And so when you get something that's talking about a weapon, now the thing about pata, this is a weapon suitable for people who have an injured hand, which I think is purely referring to the fact that it supports the wrist, and the wrist doesn't bend inside a katar. So if you had an injured hand and a sore wrist, it'd be like wearing a splint. You'd feel a lot better.
Yes.
But if you see people demonstrate the katar, this is not being done by an injured person. You've got to be incredibly fit, because katars are hard to use because it's an extension of your forearm. You have no wrist movement, so you can only move from the elbow and the shoulder and your whole body. And that's really athletically demanding.
It is.
So you read that out of context and you think, oh yeah, it supports the wrist, it's for injured people. No, it's not.
Exactly.
It might serve that purpose once in 1,000 times.
And another thing I would like to mention that again, these back then, everyone who believed in a certain religion, called the other ones infidels, right? Maybe you just add something on that bit for us.
Well, yeah, it's important to know what infidel means, which is not of our faith. So it's just anybody that, it's like when the Greeks called people barbarians.
Yeah.
Barbarian means somebody whose language sounds like people just going ba 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 ba. We don't understand it. It doesn't mean they're inferior, though obviously they did think a lot of people were
But do you understand why I say we cannot say, for two reasons? We cannot say kafare or kafare Hindu, because first of all, it's not what Hindu means. For Hindu, we have a word in Persian, like Hindi. That's what we have, Hindi in Persian. And then again, you need to say render to infidel. And then who could infidel be? Could you expand?
Well, yeah, this is the point. In India, there wasn't just one religion aside from Islam when the Islamic conquest started. There were Hindus, Jains, Buddhists. After people fled from Iran after the Arab conquest, the Parsis were Zoroastrian. There's lots of religions in India.
Yeah.
And to a practicing Muslim, they would all technically be infidels.
Yeah.
It's just a term.
Yeah.
I mean, it is meant to be insulting, because the implication was anybody who isn't like us is inferior, and every culture has some form of that kind of putting down of their of the stranger, so to speak. But to not translate it as its proper meaning, in order to give a kind of curated view of what the translator thinks most people would have thought, I think is underestimating your reader, thinking they can't handle the complex thing that infidel just meant somebody not of my religion. And it also puts yourself as the translator in the position where you may actually go down the wrong track.
Yeah.
And you may end up either misleading your reader or showing your own ignorance about what was going on. So it's wise to stick to the text as closely as possible and still making sense. And you can always put a footnote in. You can always say, this probably meant Hindus because that was the largest religious group that this person would have encountered in Hindustan.
Yes.
And I mean, they called it in Farsi, they called it Hindustan or Hindustan because that's where a lot of Hindus lived.
Yes.
I mean, it's the country of Hindus.
Yeah.
And it's not pejorative, it's just descriptive.
No, it's descriptive, absolutely. Okay, then he says, okay, this is Chester Library in my book. We removed the pictures, but for obvious copyright. Here in my book, you see this is picture 5. You see the tapash, which is basically a pata. I've shown it to Bede, right? And the other one,
long-bladed gauntlet sword.
And the other one is here is a katar, because this also shows a katar. Bede saw that, right? Remember?
Yeah. It's a side view of a katar. There's no doubt about it.
Yes. So these are from Chester Bede Library in Dublin. Again, my special thanks to our colleagues there for the cooperation. Very cooperative, very helpful. Then